Okay, have you ever, like, thought about writing a book? I mean, we've all had that idea, right? That epic fantasy, the tearjerker romance, maybe just getting all those family stories down. But then life happens,
Yeah.
and the dream kind of fades.
Yeah, totally get that.
So today we're looking at this book, How to Write a Book in 30 Days. I think it's by Molalla Media Publications.
Okay.
Sounds kind of crazy, right? Like,
Well,
is that even
I
possible?
know.
30 days!
It's definitely ambitious, but I don't think it's about, having this perfect, ready-to-publish masterpiece in a month. It's more about getting that first draft done, like making real progress on something that maybe you've been putting off for ages.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have so many projects that are just like sitting there because I just get overwhelmed by the thought of actually finishing them. Have you ever felt like that with writing?
Oh, absolutely. All the time.
But anyway, back to this 30-day thing. What I thought was cool is breaking it down, right? Like a huge, scary task into small daily goals.
Yeah, that's the key. It's like training for a marathon, right? You wouldn't just suddenly run 26 miles on day one. You build up to it. This book gets that. It even says you can adjust, how long your novel is based on how much time you have.
So it's not like, oh, super rigid, which
Yeah.
is good. Now, there's one tip that I thought was funny. It says, write drunk, edit sober.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, not literally, obviously,
Aha.
but
Right. It's more about like separating the creative part from being all critical.
mhm.
So the drunk part is like silencing that inner critic, just letting it all out without overthinking.
So kind of like brainstorming, where you just throw out any idea.
Exactly. And then when you're sober, you can go back and shape it up. And this is super important because I think perfectionism is a real problem for a lot of writers, right?
Oh, yeah.
We get stuck trying to make every sentence perfect and it just kills the creativity. So get it all out there first, then worry about polishing later.
Okay, that makes sense. I can get behind the whole like brainstorming, no judgment thing.
Mm.
But then this book says, cheat and use shorthand. What's that about?
It's a way to keep things moving. The idea is like using placeholders for names, descriptions, even whole scenes. Just write a quick summary and move on.
Ah, so you're not getting lost in the details right away.
Right. You kept the big picture, the flow going.
Okay, so don't get bogged down.
Right.
Right. And the book really emphasizes that any progress, even small steps, isn't failure. It's more about building that foundation, even if it's not all done in 30 days.
Exactly. And, thinking bigger picture, setting goals and achieving them, even if they're just for yourself, that can be really motivating, right?
Yeah, for sure. Hitting those milestones, even small ones, that can boost your confidence and make you feel like you're actually getting somewhere.
Absolutely. It's all about that positive momentum.
So anyone listening who has that book idea in their head, this book is saying, go for it. Don't let perfectionism or fear hold you back. The worst that can happen is you end up with some rough chapters, but that could be the start of something great, right?
I think so. It's all about taking that first step, back to this 30 days thing. What I think is really helpful is it doesn't just tell you to go right. It actually gives you like a structure, right?
Yeah, having a plan is always good. So what kind of structure are we talking about?
Well, it breaks the process down almost like, if you're working with a publisher or something, time for brainstorming, for outlining, actually writing, and then editing later.
Okay, so not just locking yourself in a room for a month straight.
No, no. It actually says it's important to like separate those tasks, avoid burnout. Even use your favorite writing activity as a reward. Like if you love dialogue but hate outlining, then do some dialogue after you finish an outline.
Well, I like that. It's like tricking yourself into getting it done.
Mm-hmm.
If I do this outline, I can write that awesome fight scene later. And speaking of motivation, the book mentions having a reward system too. How does that work?
Well, it can be anything, really. As simple or fancy as you want. Just, pick something that you'll actually look forward to. It could be something small, like a nice coffee, or bigger, like a weekend trip when you finish a bunch of chapters.
So we've got realistic goals, structuring our time, not being perfect right away,
Yep.
and rewarding ourselves.
Got it. But, like, practically speaking, what does a day in this challenge look like?
It starts with figuring out how fast you actually write, like how many words per hour, taking breaks and stuff into account. Then you set a word count goal for each day. Not too easy, but doable.
So let's say I can write, I don't know, 500 words an hour.
Yeah.
And I have like 2 hours a day. My goal would be 1,000 words.
Exactly. And, things happen. The book even says to factor in like interruptions and stuff, maybe even underestimate your time a bit just in case.
Yeah.
Yeah, being realistic is key. Not beating yourself up if you miss a day or something.
Right, progress over perfection. And to help with that, they recommend actually tracking your progress, like visually, Could be just marking off days on a calendar, using a spreadsheet for word count, or even those apps for
Oh, I
writers.
love visual tracking. It's
Yeah.
so satisfying to see it all laid out, like those signed days without an accident, but for writing.
Uh-huh. Right. Speaking of which, remember that cheat and use shorthand tip? The book gives some good examples.
Oh, yeah, that's what I wanted to hear more about. It feels like it could really help, people who get lost in the details. What are some ways to do that shorthand thing?
Well, one is using placeholders, like for names or descriptions. Say you just can't think of the perfect name for a character or what they're wearing. Instead of getting stuck, just write, character A wore stylish clothes, or even just describe later and keep going.
So you're basically allowing yourself to move on and fill it in later.
Yeah. Another one is like summarizing those parts that connect stuff instead of writing them all out. Like if your character has to travel, you just write, character A traveled to destination. No need to describe every step unless it's like super important.
Makes sense. Focus on the plot, then add the details later. Kind of like building a skeleton, then filling it in.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it's really freeing because you keep that flow,
Right?
not getting bogged down early on, like decluttering your writing.
Okay, I like the decluttering. But what about when you, hit a wall? Everyone gets stuck sometimes,
Yeah.
right? Staring at the screen and nothing comes out. What does the book say about that?
Well, it actually has some good advice for those moments. One thing is just like step away for a bit,
Yeah.
go for a walk, listen to music, do something totally different, let your mind rest, and you might come back with a fresh perspective.
Yeah, I found that helped. It's like your brain is working on it in the background, and then suddenly, boom, there's the solution.
It's weird how that works, right? Another thing they suggest is free writing. Just set a timer, like 10 or 15 minutes, and write anything that comes to mind, even if it has nothing to do with your project, just to get those creative juices flowing again.
Like a warm-up before the real workout.
Exactly. And sometimes just changing your environment helps. Try a different spot, like a coffee shop. Or if you usually type, try writing by hand for a bit. Little things like that can make a difference.
It's about finding what works for you, I guess.
Yeah.
Experimenting. For me, reading always helps when I'm stuck. Like getting lost in someone else's work, especially in the same genre. It sparks new ideas and reminds me why I love writing in the first place.
Oh, totally. Reading is like fuel for writers, and it doesn't even have to be the same genre. Sometimes something completely different can give you those unexpected connections.
Yeah, totally agree. So what about tools and stuff? Does the book recommend any specific programs or apps for this 30-day thing?
Yeah, they mention a few. One is Scrivener. It's specifically for big writing projects like novels.
Yeah.
Keeps your research, notes, outlines, everything in one place, like a super organized writing desk.
Scrivener, yeah, I've heard good things about that. Sounds intense, but in a good way.
It can be, but it's great for some people. If you want something simpler, they also mention those note-taking apps like Evernote or Notion. Good for brainstorming, outlining, even just jotting down ideas when you're out and about.
Oh yeah, having those apps is great for when inspiration hits randomly. Like you're at the store and suddenly, bam, a plot twist. Got to write it down before you forget.
Uh-huh, exactly. So going back to something we talked about before, the book really stresses embracing those imperfections early on, right? But how do you balance that with like actually making a good story? Does the right drunk thing just lead to chaos?
That's a great question. It's about finding that balance, right? Between letting your creativity go wild, but still having some structure, like jazz improvisation. There's freedom, but there's also a framework. I love that analogy. So how do you do that in your own writing? Make sure the drunk writing doesn't go totally off the rails.
Well, for me, I always keep that core story idea in mind. Even if I stray from the outline a bit, it still has to fit the overall narrative.
Right. Trust your gut, but don't forget the big picture.
Exactly. And another thing I do is what I call structured free writing. I'll set a timer, but before I start, I'll write down a few points or questions I want to explore.
So it's like having a loose plan, even within the free writing.
Yeah, exactly. Freedom and structure. And going back to that visual tracking thing, any other cool ways to do that besides like calendars and stuff? I'm always up for trying new things.
Oh, definitely. It's all about finding what works for you. I've seen writers use a word count jar, like an empty jar, and you add a bead or something for every 100 or 1,000 words you write.
That's cute, like a visual reminder of how much you've done. Yeah. And another one is a writing map, especially for novels. Like you draw your fictional world and mark off the places your characters go as you write. Or a timeline of events, highlighting the milestones as you reach them.
Those are fun. Makes it feel more like an adventure,
It does. And remember, tracking isn't just about motivation. It's also about learning about yourself. Like if you track your word count every day, you might notice patterns. Maybe you're more productive in the morning, or you always hit a slump at a certain time.
That's true. It's like understanding your own creative rhythm so you can make the most of it.
Exactly. The more you know about how you write, the easier it'll be to face those writing challenges.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah.
So before we move on, a little challenge for our listeners. How can you visualize your progress? Think outside the box. Word count jar, writing map, something totally unique. Share your ideas on social media. We'd love to see them.
Yes, definitely. We're excited to see what you come up with. And in the next part, we'll be looking at more tips from the book, focusing on how to keep going even when things get tough.
So stay tuned. We'll be right back. So we're back. And I think the big question after all this is, can you really write a book in 30 days? What do you think?
It's the question, right? And I think, like a lot of things, it depends. Like, what's a book to you? How fast do you write? How much time do you actually have? But I think what this book is saying is you can make a lot of progress, even in a short time, if you do it right.
Yeah, it's not about like having a finished manuscript in 30 days ready to go. It's more like getting over that starting block,
Yeah.
building something.
Exactly. And for anyone who's ever thought about writing a book but felt like totally overwhelmed, this breaks it down into smaller steps.
Makes it less scary. So let's go over the main takeaways one last time. First, those realistic goals. Don't try writing like War and Peace in 30 days if you only have an hour a day to write.
Right. Start small. Be nice to yourself. And it's okay if those goals change as you go. Life happens.
Totally. Next, having a plan for your writing time. When you'll write, for how long, and what you'll focus on during that time.
And don't forget those rewards. Gotta celebrate those wins.
Number 3, don't aim for perfection right away. The first draft, it's going to be messy. That's okay. Just get it all out there.
Any progress is good progress, right?
And lastly, those shorthand tricks. Using placeholders, summaries, all that keeps you moving and not getting stuck on tiny things too early.
Big picture first.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up, I have a thought for everyone. Imagine you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice about writing. What would it be? Think about that for a minute.
That's a good one. Really makes you think.
It's about facing those fears, embracing the messiness and just starting. So anyone listening who's ready to actually write that book, you got this. With a little planning, some structure, and being okay with things not being perfect, you can do so much. Who knows, maybe you'll even surprise yourself with what you can do in just 30 days.
And remember, we're here cheering you on. Share your journey with us online and stay tuned for more deep dives into writing and all that fun stuff.
Until next time, everyone, happy writing.